Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Council of Graduate Schools webinar, Building a Graduate Enrollment Ecosystem, Experienced Leaders Share Best Practices. This webinar is sponsored by Liaison. My name is Matthew Linton. Next slide, Adrian. So before we get started with the presentations, a couple of webinar logistics. We ask that you please submit questions at any time through the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. However, we will only be answering audience questions during the designated Q&A period at the end of the presentations. The recording and presentation slides will be emailed to registrants as well as posted to the CGS website after the live event. And we try to do that within 1 week of the live event. The chat is available to all attendees for this webinar, and conversation in the chat between attendees is encouraged. Next slide. And so it's my honor to welcome my colleague, Julia Kent, Vice President of Best Practices and Strategic Initiatives at the Council of Graduate Schools, to get us started. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to all of you who are here today. We wish you good afternoon, and to our members on the West Coast, good morning. So CGS consistently hears from our members that they're devoting a significant amount of their time providing leadership in graduate enrollment management, which often includes identifying and implementing technologies to support their institution's graduate enrollment goals. They also tell us that successful graduate admissions and enrollment strategies often require different approaches than those used in undergraduate admissions, which I'm sure resonates with many of you. This can present challenges when some of the same tools and systems like CRM are used by their institution for both undergraduate and graduate enrollment. And this is why I am pleased that today's webinar will focus on what several universities are learning as they select and work with multiple software and service providers to advance their institution's graduate recruiting, admissions, and enrollment goals. I'd like to thank Liaison International for their programmatic and financial support of the webinar, and also for their participation in the CGS Sustaining Membership Network, which allows companies like Liaison to demonstrate their commitment to advancing graduate education. So at this time, I am pleased to introduce Jillian Baer, who will serve as the webinar moderator today, and will also introduce the panelists. Jillian currently serves as Client Delivery Manager for Liaison, leading university clients through implementations of their central application services. And prior to joining Liaison, she worked in higher education for 12 years in various graduate enrollment management positions at The Ohio State University, including as Director of Graduate Recruitment in the College of Engineering. Jillian is a graduate of Elon University and has completed a Master of Arts in Higher Education from Ohio State. So without further ado, Jillian.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate you and really everyone at CGS for your work, not only on this presentation today, but all the work that CGS is doing to support the membership schools. I know Liaison really enjoys and loves being a strategic partner with CGS. And for me, especially being able to come to a session like this and talk with brilliant experts in the field from higher education, I feel a little bit like I'm coming home, like I'm coming back to some of my higher ed roots. Big fan of CGS, had been a member before. So really thrilled to be here and really thrilled to bring you our various panelists today. Our goal is really to touch on the entire ecosystem. From the name of the session, you sort of get that sense. Obviously, I am here representing Liaison, but we're just one of many systems that you all have to choose from in this much larger space of education technology. There are a lot of systems at play in your day-to-day lives, and I remember those struggles well. So using some of my experience from GEM, Graduate Enrollment Management, and also from the work that I do here at Liaison, helping partner schools really get set up for success on central app services. I'm really hoping to share with you a little bit about my experience, but more importantly, really help our experts share theirs. So I do want to jump in and let the panelists introduce themselves. As Julia mentioned, I come from a background in higher education at Ohio State, worked in a lot of different graduate recruitment and admissions offices, and worked with a different tool in every one. Even though I was on one campus, every time I made a move, it was a totally different system. So I know the pain that comes with this. And I don't want to go and continue to talk about me. I really want to turn it over to our experts. I'm going to have them each introduce themselves and talk about their roles, the different goals that they have within the positions they hold, and their universities as a whole as well. So they're going to guide us through a little bit of their decision-making process and some of the structures they've set up to serve them in the long run. And I'm going to toss it first over to our folks at Kettering. If you all will introduce yourselves and some of the goals you have with your institution and maybe some of the takeaways you're hoping to leave some folks with today, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Jillian. So my name is Scott Travis. I'm the Director of Specialty Admissions at Kettering University. That includes our graduate population and our international folk that are coming to the university, both undergraduate and graduate. Kettering's a pretty small specialty school. We primarily do engineering. We're located in Michigan. And we have a long legacy in automotive engineering. So we're very focused on the audience that we're delivering to. We're not a school that has a huge breadth of offerings. And that certainly changes our approach and certainly affects everything that we do here in admissions, including the technology that we use. So I'll go into a little bit more specifics as we answer questions, but I want to turn it over to my partner in arms here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Trisha Lynch. I am the Associate Director for Enrollment Operations at Kettering. And I come from actually a long background in higher ed, but recently, before moving into operations, I was an end user, a recruiter. And so I kind of see the user spot as well as now the technology. So a lot of my role and my team's role, because it's really a team, I can't do things without the team that's behind me, is to make our systems run in a way that our admissions team can use them seamlessly. So I take the huge jumble of spider webs and throw them out in a way that they run seamless, and to take everything that we've designed for undergrad and decide what we can use for grad and how we need to change it for grad, and force people to not use the same footprints. So it's really taking a fresh look, because we've taken our graduate in the previous and we've shoved it on top of an undergraduate and said, there it works, and really to untangle it and make it all work better. So my team's job is really to make Scott's team's job easier.
That's great. Thank you, Trisha and Scott, so much. That sounds like a task. I got to say, I've been there. That is no easy feat. So I look forward to hearing what you all have to say throughout this session. Thank you so much for that introduction. Let's move on to Charisse, and quite a different circumstance at Arkansas State, potentially.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charisse Jones-Branch. I'm Dean of the Graduate School at Arkansas State, and I'm also a professor of history, and that's actually the background that I come from. Just a little bit about Arkansas State. We're a Research 2 institution, and most people don't know where Jonesboro is, but we are actually an hour away from Memphis, Tennessee, and about 2.5 hours away from Little Rock, which is the capital. Our graduate students, our population is about 4,600. I would say maybe about 3,000 of that is online students. We've got emphases all over, but most of it tends to be in math and science and computer engineering in our master's in business administration programs. I also think it's important to mention that for about 5 to 7 years, we didn't have a graduate school. It was just reestablished in 2020. And so I'm the inaugural dean of the newly established graduate school. And one of the things that I've been really interested in is increasing outreach to graduate students and making sure access to programs is nimble and flexible, because we do have to think differently about who graduate students are, how they're different from undergraduate students, and even how they're different, how their experiences are different from what I experienced as a graduate student 20 some odd years ago. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the best ways to get data and to utilize data to improve the experiences for graduate students.
Thank you so much, Sharice. And that is a whole new set of challenges as well that you will bring forward and talk to us about. So I appreciate it. And I also must say, I believe you got your PhD in history from Ohio State. Is that correct? Go Bucks.
Correct. Go Buckeyes.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I look forward to hearing how your adventures have been since starting this office. That's great. So if we want to advance the slides, I think from what I heard from these folks and from what I also know in previous roles similar, is that a lot of you in the audience today likely wear many hats. In graduate education, I think more than other offices or counterparts on our campus, we have a lot of jobs. Faculty and staff have a lot of demands that are put on them in the roles that they play. In graduate education, especially, you might be doing 3 to 5 jobs at any given time or wearing those different hats. And so often being spread thinner than you might find on the undergraduate side or in a different area of campus. And so the things on the screen is really just beginning, the tip of the iceberg, if you will, to represent some of the work that you all are doing in GEM. I remember when I was at a very small college on Ohio State's campus, myself and my faculty chair did everything. I mean, from marketing to recruitment, event planning, interview scheduling, even all the way through orientation and advising the students and graduation, getting them out, right, for some of our masters and certainly all our faculty advising our PhDs. So we know in graduate education that this is a phenomenon on any type of campus that you find. And so when I personally myself started looking at how to ask for help, I found everyone in my department was equally as spread thin, that it was very challenging. Everyone's doing multiple jobs and got a lot of work to do. So I started looking outward, right? And I think that's what we're going to hear from our panelists today is how do you begin looking outside your office for partners that maybe have proven solutions or case studies that get at the same problems that your campus might be facing. Looking for a team who understands really grad enrollment management and the nuances there and how that can help your department when everybody's a little fried, especially in these chosen times. It's certainly challenging. So on the next slide, we know that you all have lots and lots of options of partners. This doesn't even begin to touch the comprehensive list. But everything listed on here is a liaison partner. So these are people we work with, we have integrations with, so we know the struggles they go through working with our college partners, and we work side by side. I know I debrief with some of these partners myself and talk to them about the struggles their campuses have faced and what our campuses have faced and those that we interact with. There are so many great teams and great companies out there doing work in graduate education. And supporting our campuses that are doing this great work and supporting students. So some of these may come up in our discussion today, and we hope you know that, obviously when we think of an ecosystem and a total enrollment funnel, you're going to hit lots of different systems. And how do they talk to each other? And how do they work with your campus? And how does the team sort of emphasize the goals and the work that you're doing on your campus? And so in the next slide, we understand that this ecosystem is nonstop. It just keeps going. It's a very cyclical process, right? There's so much work that you're doing and balancing at any given time. Many colleges seek out partners for that reason. And most important, the administrators and the faculty really need partners that'll work seamlessly together. And that's part of that ecosystem concept. So we spend a lot of time talking about that at Liaison with all those partners that you saw, is how do we work with them in conjunction to make sure the student is achieving that ultimate goal, and we're making it as easy on them as possible, as easy as we can on our faculty and administrators as well. And so those are all big considerations to come up with. And so some of the earliest steps are going to be regarding decision making, right? And how do we decide on those partners? How do you consider partnerships and implementations? How do you begin to explore your options? And this is where we're really going to rely on our panelists and hear what they have to say. We know that no one solution is one size fits all. So unique perspectives are always great. We have 2 very different campuses represented today, which I think just helps embolden the conversation to really make sure it's inclusive to all those that may be in the audience. So we'll end the conversation today with some key considerations so that you can take away the thoughts that you want to leave here with and make sure you have a plan of action as well. So we're going to jump into our first question for our panelists and really let them sort of expand on some of their experiences. We've talked a lot about this so far. Everyone on the call knows that undergrad and graduate can often differ. But what I want to hear really from our speakers today is what are the unique challenges, right? We know that they're different. We know that that comes inherently with different behavior, workflows, technologies, needs, goals, any spectrum of things. What are the challenges really when we talk the differences between graduate admissions and undergraduate admissions when we look for these partners and technology solutions? How about Kettering? Do we want to, Scott or Tricia, do you guys have any thoughts on this? Just kick us off.
Sure, we can jump in. So I think there's some big bucket issues that we can address right away between our undergraduate and our graduate population. You know, for example, even though Kettering University is all STEM and management, you know, what we choose to do as far as expanding our portfolio on undergraduate is very different from the specificity of our portfolio on the graduate side. So we have a very, very narrow focus on the graduate side, and everything that we do really kind of hones down to that needle in the haystack. On the undergraduate side, of course, we're trying to expand our boundaries all the time. So there's this a little bit of an accordion effect, right? Both in our marketing, but even our on-campus tooling. You know, how do you, on the one population, try to broaden yourself, and then the other population even maintain that focus and display that focus. From the same sense, not just our degree programs, but you know, the citizenship of our population. So Kettering University, on the undergraduate side, we're about 5% international, and on the graduate side, we're 85% international. So there's a lot of people out there that will think, well, you know, what are the differences? Well, as we all know, there's huge differences in the way that you present your offerings, certainly, you know, different timelines, different cycles of enrollment, and just from a very technical standpoint, some different hoops to jump through. So those are some big differences that are obvious. And once you start, you know, those differences really start to leap out if you're trying to build a graduate program on an undergraduate footprint. It just doesn't work for obvious reasons. Some of the topics as well, as far as the difference between graduate and undergraduate, Kettering, for example, we tend to, just the admissions process tends to be a little different. So for lack of a better term, we're a little bit more squishy when it comes to admissions on the graduate side. So whether or not standardized test scores are absolutely required, for example, it's really kind of a case-by-case situation. And you know, the differences between official transcripts, non-official transcripts, you know, these are very kind of logic-driven scenarios on the undergraduate side. On the graduate side, you know, it's a little softer as far as policy goes. So before we even start implementing a lot of technology, we have to kind of address the logic behind it. And that goes right to our faculty, it goes right to our catalog. And you know, even at the very beginning of such a process, very often there's meetings with department heads and deans and just saying, okay, what do we need and what don't we need and how do we engage? So I think that's how I'll kick things off. Tricia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna, you know, go on your squishy comment there. The squishy is what makes it really hard in technology to implement things, because I have to take what Scott wants and translate it to our partners who are helping us build our integrations, because some of the integrations are not meant to be built in your in-house team. It just, you're going to make yourself crazy if you try to do everything by yourself. So to translate some of those squishy into scalable technology is often very, very difficult. And that squishiness also rolls into our cycle for our graduate students. So many places, you know, will roll in their class in the fall and then they'll be all set. Well, you know, our graduate admissions will run year round, basically. You know, every 3 months, we could be potentially bringing in new graduate students. So that squishiness continues to run the hamster wheel that our undergraduate is not running that same hamster wheel. So to keep those two things together is like, you know, patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The variation too, I think even from, the squishy being the variance, right, between departments and disciplines and everyone having different deadlines and rules often is a need that you would want a partner to fit and a key factor in the implementation of it. So yeah, serving a lot of masters tends to make it a little squishy. I think that's great. Charisse, anything to add from a very different type of campus perspective?
Sure, absolutely. We also have a fairly sizable international graduate student population, but the difference for us is we don't process those applications in the graduate school. They actually go to international programs. Now, I'll get emails from all over the world asking about GRE scores and the like, but I automatically forward those to international programs. So we're not as hands-on as that is concerned. And it's the same thing for our online programs. We have a separate area with a director and an associate director that deals with online programs. And really the only time I interact with students from those programs is if there's a problem. That's when I tend to get emails from them, but most of our dealing is with face-to-face programs. One way our admissions process is different from undergrads is that the graduate school doesn't require the GRE, but individual programs may require the GRE. And we're constantly in discussions about that. And on occasion, I will get emails from departments that will say, our graduate program met and we decided for whatever reason that we no longer want to require the GRE, but that's not something we've mandated. We've just left it to them to make that decision. Also, in terms of applying to the graduate school, they apply to the graduate school itself, but the final decisions are made by the department. We process the applications, we send it to the department, they let us know what they've decided, and we send out the notice of admissions. Now, because we didn't have a graduate school for about 5 to 7 years, it was dismantled. And as I said, it came back in 2020. We have to think about things differently. And one of those big things that I've been spending a lot of time thinking and talking about is how do we streamline processes? Because there was a time there where the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. So we're trying to streamline those processes. And I think one of the ways that we can better do that is to start thinking about the kinds of technologies to help us do things more efficiently. So we're starting to have more discussions about that, and that's the direction that I see us moving in.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. I think being in a newly formed or newly reinvented office has so many of its own challenges. And certainly I think regardless of size, so many campuses deal with that same hybrid model, right, of the governance where it's maybe things are filtering through a grad school or grad admissions, but decisions are ultimately being made, maybe not even at the department, but at a program level, right? So there's so many levels there. How do we make sure everybody's on the same page when there's a faculty member in this department on that side of campus, that has to communicate with an admissions counselor in a central office? There's a lot of parts at play. And I think that can be a really complex, that hybrid model, a complex thing to solve for. So I appreciate you all shedding light on that. If we go to the next slide where we ask, we're curious about what partners are in your network. And I don't even know that we specifically need to know, a specific technology or a specific company, but I'd be curious, actually, Charisse, I might go to you first. Being new to your role with a newly reformed office, how do you begin understanding who the partners are, right? Where do you start to gather the information about what maybe already is on your campus, right? Regardless of who it is, how do you even begin to find that out? What's been your process for that?
Well, I knew coming into this that we didn't have some of these partnerships, so that wasn't difficult. For me, it was a matter of emailing people, but far more often having people email me for conversations about these different kinds of technologies, what they do well, what institutions have used them before, and just me having conversations with those folks to try to figure out what will work best for Arkansas State.
That's great. And so for Scott and Trisha, how have you all worked with existing partners in your network, right? How do you decide, how do you figure out who is already there? What partners are you working with that seem to make sense to you? How has that process been?
Sure, I think that we've had long-standing relationships with a couple of tech partners, and have had a tremendous amount of success. And the tendency is, we have a lot of faith. They know Kettering, we know them, and all of that has primarily been based on an undergraduate population. So one of the things that we look at first, we have a comfort level with a lot of those partners, but we have to ask and truly accept the answer, whether or not that they have any familiarity with the international population. And that has it's a difficult answer to get sometimes. So, a partner that you've been working with for 10 years, and you have a substantial scaled model already built and a financial investment that's already made, maybe you could take it and take and leverage some of those pieces. But it's like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. It just, if they don't have that expertise, then it's just not going to work no matter how much you want it to. That's definitely a case with a couple of our longstanding partners.
Yeah, so we've actually been on a CRM since 2012 is when we moved over. And so that was the advent of everybody moving to things like Slate or TargetX or, everywhere. And wool off, the eyes, we're a TargetX partner. And what we've had to learn over the years with our technology is to look at our partners as though they're in the office next to us. So they are not some stranger that's just going to fix our problems. They are a colleague in this just as well as we are. When things go wrong, they need to have our back, but we need to be extremely grateful to have them. So we know them by first name, we're rolling with them. So, and we've stuck with partners, sometimes because it is a huge investment, the lift on movement is difficult. So, with some of our partners, we've hit bumpy roads. They know we've hit bumpy roads, and they fix things, we fix things, and we move forward. But, when you look at it, how much would a move cost you? It's just like moving your house. What would it cost you? And then, what integrates well? So another thing is always picking our partners who have good integration. So sometimes when we've looked, we found other partners that just don't integrate well. So, we've moved to a point where our Parchment now integrates in. So if we ever get anything from Parchment, we're getting centralized application service integrated in. We're getting everything so that it fires automatically. And part of that is also because that's our customers' desire. They don't want to wait for a person in the background to process this and move this forward. I mean, my colleagues and I were just remarking that it's 2017. We had just a room full of paper files, just, one after the other. And we'd be crazy in the filing, world right now. And we don't touch paper, so it's our technology partners that have made all of this, possible to keep moving everything forward and keep growing with them. With our technology partners, we have to make sure we do all the upgrades they want and not be afraid to make those moves. It's been a hard lesson for us to realize that tech changes almost every quarter. So if we are behind by 6 months, we're behind. So we need to stay fresh. We need to stay going, and trust them.
Yeah, I remember stacks of paper like it was yesterday. I think a lot of folks on this call probably feel that pain. And I know a lot are still in that. And especially when you talk about moving a whole campus, right? There's often holdouts. You might have some departments still that are still holding on to that file folder with the applicant materials in there. It's inevitable, and certainly part of that issue. So that's great. And thank you for sharing some of that information. The next question is really, a continuation. We've sort of already hit on this a little bit, but I don't know, Scott or Tricia, if you have anything to expand on really how you're getting some of those systems to work together. I know you touched on that a little bit. If you have additional insight on what's worked for you, right? As far as when we think about this ecosystem of trying to make it as easy on the applicant as possible, as easy on the user as possible, what has worked as far as how you use these tools and how they work together?
Sure. So I think that, you know, you have to kind of stick with some goals right from the outset. You have to recognize what resources and what your limitations are. In a recent implementation, we just wanted to generate volume. That was it. End of story. And I know that's common across a lot of campuses, but those waters can get muddied pretty quickly. So you have to, you know, regardless of what's going on with implementation or what's going on when you're vetting different types of technology, it's really important to stick to your guns and really, regardless of what the features that are offered are, you have to remember just exactly what your goal is. And different partners have different strengths. So it could be a really, really good partner, maybe somebody that you're just learning about and you're just saying, wow, this would be super helpful. But at the end of the day, you have to go back and say, yeah, it's super helpful, but it is addressing what my issue was. And I find that that's relatively easy to do, but I certainly, and I think everybody has compatriots across the university that they get distracted a little quicker. And they end up kind of chasing down this rabbit hole that you never intended to stumble upon to begin with. So I think that's where you have to kind of stick with your guns. The other thing that I have personally found to be of huge, huge benefit, I don't work in tech. It's not my first language by any stretch, And so I think that when I'm working with new partners, it's really important for me personally, that a representative with a new partner has worked in the university world. They've worked in admissions or enrollment management. And so, you know, from a certain sense, they kind of, I get that that we can have a conversation together, and they can feel my pain. And when I ask a question, I can put it in like an enrollment management language, and they understand it. And then they answer me in enrollment management lingo, you know, because as soon as they start to dive into a lot of technology lingo, I kind of get a little lost. And certainly I have an operations team to rely on there, but it's nice to work with partners that can kind of see the perspective that we're coming from. The other thing that I've noticed with a lot of technology is a lot of partners that are available, they work with, you know, dozens and dozens or maybe hundreds of universities. And they have kind of, in many cases, they have put together or perfected solutions that work for the majority. And that's not necessarily the best solution for us. Like I said, we're a specialty school. Our processes are a little different. And I don't want to say that we're, you know, unique. Every school is unique, right? And every school is certainly going to say they're unique. But certainly something that somebody says, hey, this is gonna work great because it works great for 90% of our users. It just seems like we always fall into that last 10%. And it's great to be able to, you know, identify that very, very early on in a relationship, or even while you're vetting things, to figure out whether it's going to work or not.
And one thing I wanted to add on what Scott had to put there is we're dealing with technology, but at the same point, we like to bring our partners sometimes to the table together. So typically our partners are not competing with each other. They have each a different thing they're bringing. So especially when we're using their products in tandem, we'll have a meeting with partners all at the table so that we're not keeping it hidden on what we're trying to accomplish from A to Z. They can see that, well, that's feeding there and I need to get this there for you. And so we bring the people to the table, even though the technology is going to be doing the work, we bring the people, you know, and get to know each other personally.
Yeah, that's a great, I think, project management tool, right? To just, put everybody in a room and lock the door until you figure it out. That's, I'm a fan of that tactic, although I don't know how many people would agree with me across the various teams I work with. But I think it's great. And so Tricia, is that a recommendation you would put to folks like that? Is that like a good, like a tip, like that you have found that to work by bringing those people together?
Oh, absolutely. Because otherwise you're sitting in the middle and you're trying to translate what one group said to you to somebody else who's got to help you make it work. So let's cross out the middleman here. And I'll watch them do their magic as a partner, talk to a partner, because they're the specialists in what they're doing for us.
Yeah.
And so we might as well use them.
That's great. That's great. And Sharice, I know you're sort of very early in this process as you're rebuilding your office. As you think about partners, any general best practices you're considering, right? As you learn about tools that may already exist on your campus, or how different offices work together. Even again, I mean, Tricia just talked very much about a people, partnership. And it's not always just the technology, but also how people across various campuses like yours are working together. Any tips from you?
Right. One of the things I was thinking about as Tricia was talking to the angle of dealing with people, because we are so new with this, one of the things that is important to me is patience. It's patience with the fact that we haven't done this before. This is very new for us. We are now using Slate. The undergraduate side of the house has been using Slate for a while. We are brand spanking new, as in we're not even a year in. And so making that transition to using Slate was interesting for my office. So working with people who understood that this was new to us, that this was a little frightening to us, that says a lot about the nature of our partnership, that we don't just have the technology to help us streamline processes and get information and help application and admissions and so on and so forth. We've got people who are working with us hand in hand to make sure we're comfortable with the transition that we're making here. And I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, that transition, the change management is such a big part of that, right? It's not just the technology, but how do we bring everybody along for this ride and get everyone's buy-in and manage that change? Because the human element, certainly being an education person myself, is real. I mean, I still to this day don't consider myself a tech person, even though I work in tech. I am a higher ed nerd to the core. And so, yeah, I get it. It can be a really tough road, any transition, right, of any kind on a higher ed campus, especially, campuses who have been around for a long time are big ships to try and move. So moving into our last sort of predefined question here. As you all have sought out these partners, and we've talked a lot about the ecosystem as a whole and how to make them work together, what are you looking for when you assess options, right? If you're considering tools, I mean, Sharice talked about just joining in with Slate, and Tricia and Scott, I know you have a couple of partners on campus. When you're considering from the vast majority of how many are out there, and I know you all have touched on this a little bit about things, and Scott, I know you had some ideas about what you were looking for at different points. Yeah, what are some good tips for the audience members about how to assess what the options are and how to make choices? And so I might start with Scott and Tricia again, since we've sort of already hit on this a little bit, to maybe dive in a little deeper.
Sure. And Sharice mentioned patience, which is something that I struggle with on occasion. I think that there's a few things that I've learned just with actually a pretty recent implementation. In one case, I think that, and there's a negotiation to be had here. But, on paper and with the way the contracts are drawn out and the way the technology at least is presented, there's kind of this contract period where you run, and then if you want to make a change, there's a day where you flip the switch and then you move in a different direction the next day. Well, that flipping of the switch is not a flip of the switch, right? And I've learned that I think that's where things require a tremendous amount of patience. That it's never quite as clean as that you might expect. And to go ahead and maybe make some contingency plans, you have to have an understanding that there might be some manual processing that goes on while that flipping of the switch goes on. And you might understand that in case of like an exclusive contract, the end of one exclusive contract and the beginning of another exclusive contract, I've realized now that a little bit of overlap, and I know from a logic standpoint there can be limitations there, but a little overlap sometimes might be a little bit better than a period of time where there's a vacancy and all that manual work that has to get done. So I think it's just a matter of just a better understanding of that flipping of the switch. And certainly, from a customer service standpoint, that switch gets fuzzy too. And I think that I recently I've learned that I need to get better definitions from our technology partners. You have, the outward facing, the public facing switch, and then you have the integration, right? And all the technology and the data transfer that's happening on campus, and that's sometimes happening at a different time. So, kind of trying to figure out, the time that it takes to go from the public facing to the internal processing, and having a better understanding of, how long that's going to take. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of the technology runs into some bumps. And I think you just kind of have to have a plan for that and understand that the quote unquote flip of the switch, it's going to take longer than what anybody probably has predicted. So you need to build some padding in and maybe kind of like a couple contingency plans, just to kind of cover that middle ground. So that's something that I've definitely looked for. And again, I just want to go back and reiterate just that the providers, the technology providers, they really understand the population that you're trying to service. And very often we do this as well as universities, right? Somebody asks us a question and we really spend a lot of time telling the audience what our needs are and what our strengths are. And maybe we need to listen a little bit better and understand what their strengths are and what they can deliver. Sometimes there's a little disconnect there too.
That's great. I think all that's great feedback. One follow-up question to what you said with the flipping of the switch, those getting the clearer definitions and learning more about that process. Is that a recommendation you would make for like while you're shopping, like very early on, it sounds like, right? When you're just beginning to meet with some of these partners, is that a depth that you would maybe recommend going into at that early stage?
Yeah, well, I think I can answer that in a couple of different ways.
Yeah.
One, absolutely try to get an assessment on that. But two, understanding that, it's a little bit of case by case and your partners might not have an accurate answer, right? So, or at least the one they give you might not turn out to be the one that ends up being true. So I think you ask the questions, but you have the understanding that there might be some unpredictable bumps and, to plan for those too.
In our case, our IT department decided we needed a new server before we finished an implementation. And even though they were involved when we started the contract, that created a bump. So, I wanted to point it out for one of the things we look when we're looking for software and service providers. It's just so simple, is where are our competitors and where is our customer comfort? Because, if our customers are going somewhere, we've got to meet them there. So technology is getting so much more customer facing. We talk a lot about our CRMs in the background and all of that, but every CRM, everything has some point where it's forward facing to the customer. So if the customer is used to something, you go there, and where our competitors are, because, it's, if they're playing in something and they're having great success, you might as well try out that same spot that they are. So it doesn't always pay to be different.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip, right? I mean, just continued research. I know when I was an administrator, sessions like this were really helpful to hear people talk about what they're using and what works and what's not working and things like that. So I think that's where a lot of the folks, hopefully, that are on the call today are finding that useful to hear from you all the tools and maybe talking with counterparts at a CGS conference or, attending a panel and talking to the person sitting next to you and saying, oh, your school's like mine. What works for you? I found that to be invaluable, right? When I was in higher ed, making those connections. So Charisse, anything to add here when you're looking for a partner? What are the things you're looking for? What are the questions you're asking? And what are the things you're going to assess?
Well, I've already said I expect patience, but I also expect conversations. Don't imagine that I'm just going to jump out of the gate and purchase the first thing you offer me. I need to be sure that you understand the particular needs of my institution, my graduate student population. I need you to also understand that any decision I make as graduate school dean, I'm going to have to justify that to the higher ups on my campus. So I'm not at all inclined to make fast decisions about anything, particularly anything that might cost a considerable amount of money in this time when many universities are cutting budgets or at least tightening belts. And so if you're doing a lot of fast talking and trying to push me to make a purchase that I don't feel I'm ready for, or that I don't feel is best for the graduate school, you're probably not going to hold my attention for very long. So that patience, those conversations, repeated conversations, and perhaps even repeated demonstrations, that's the stuff that carries a whole lot more weight with me than someone trying to push me into a decision that I might later regret.
And that makes so much sense. As we all know, college campuses and higher ed institutions are very collaborative. There are so many teams that have to weigh into this decision. I mean, Trisha mentioned an IT team, right? Cherise talking about up the ladder. There's a lot of red tape that exists on our campuses, and for good reason, right? That a lot of people need to be involved in these decisions as they go. And so having the right people in the room and taking the time to make sure the right folks are weighing in is another tip that I would share, right? As you're making these assessments, bring other people into the table. You know, if you're not someone who speaks tech, find someone who does, you know, grab your IT team or a representative that can be a liaison to that team for the project, who has the bandwidth and the ability to take some of this work on, because you can't do it alone. No one can, right? And so what are the teams that need to be at the table, and assembling that sort of perfect collaborative, you know, team cross-representing the various departments that are impacted. And that can take time. That can certainly take time. So I think that's great. I think, yeah, that's all been really, really helpful. We've got about just under 15 minutes left. So let's move. The next slide is really, we wanted to make sure that those in attendance today had some takeaways, right? These are very similar to a lot of the questions that we've posed to our panelists, but for key considerations, the things you want to take away thinking about, right? Because this isn't the kind of thing where you can walk away with like, here are the 6 steps I'm going to take to implement a new technology, right? This is more of a discussion about learning from our colleagues about best practices. What works and what doesn't varies greatly across different campuses. So things for you to think about, right, is what sets you apart. I mean, not just graduate and undergraduate on a grand scale, but on your campus. Whether you're an Ohio State University R1 institution, or a community college serving the local public, or an online institution serving, you know, students all over the world, what makes your graduate side different from your undergraduate side, and what may differ in the needs there, especially if you're talking about adopting a technology that already exists on campus in an undergrad space, right? Something to think about before you go that route. What partners already exist on your campus, right? The flip side of that is, if it's already on campus and it's an existing partnership, as Scott and Trisha talked about, what a great place to start. You might know someone there. They understand your campus and your students. But always going back to, are the students different, right? At the grad and undergrad side, but is there any relationship you can leverage in new ways to help serve graduate enrollment goals that maybe hasn't been thought of yet? But a technology already existing on your campus is a great place to start. And what really would make a great total enrollment partner for you? I use total enrollment sort of in a general sense here. We talk a lot about that at Liaison because we really want to think about the entire graduate enrollment funnel, right? We don't talk a lot about just grad admissions. It's a funnel. We need to be communicating with these students all the way through for retention and graduation purposes, past just getting them to apply, right? So it really is a total enrollment sort of idea. And what makes a good partner is going to differ. It's going to look different on Kettering as it does on Arkansas State. It's going to differ by region, by size, by focus of your institution. So really thinking through for you, what would make a good partner, right? And what are the things you want to focus on and avoid? So those are just some key takeaways we wanted to leave the audience members with, so that they have something to go back and really think about, because this is so unique to each of their experiences. But if we jump to the next slide, I know we do have a couple of questions that have already come through that I'm happy to read out for our panelists. One of the first is pretty specific. Earlier on today, Trisha specifically, but this really could go for anyone, you had talked about bringing partners to the table, right? And having sit downs with those people that you all work with and your technology partners that you have signed on with. The question from Sabrina in our group, thank you for submitting. How often do you meet with your partners? What's a typical cadence, and does it change? And what does that look like? How often?
So we actually, so we're TargetX partner, and we went with Premier. And we take every advantage of that. We actually have our person, we meet once a week at least. And so, and that has been an incredible growth experience for us. I'm not a Salesforce architect. I am an aspiring administrator on Salesforce. It's 5 years ago when I switched over to the operations team, I didn't know how to do any of it. And so using your partners even as an education tool. So we meet every week with the different issues we have, different things that we're trying to do, and we just keep growing our ecosystem. Our CRM has jumped leaps and bounds, and it kind of may drive my end users kind of nuts because we've gone from our classic system to, Salesforce Lightning to, we've moved. I mean, if you looked at our office 5 years ago when we just started meeting with them weekly to where we are now, it's an entirely different system. So we meet weekly with TargetX. We also, because we are so integrated with it, or so we use them so much, we volunteer ourselves as a beta tester for things. So we were one of their betas when they went into their new texting software. We got that implemented and supported. That's how we got to know another employee who we know by first name, Tim. And then Tim's like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to be a beta school for an integration with CAS. And, we were like, hey, Tim, we're looking for it. So, and so it's those relationships that get us. So now we meet weekly with TargetX, we meet weekly with Liaison at least, because I know Scott has some other meetings with them. So, and we know them by first name. When we have cases, we throw them into our partners, and we're getting resolution within a day or two. So if your partners are not giving you fast resolution, it's not really a partner. That's kind of a tool instead. But yeah, I would definitely take advantage of setting that cadence of as often as possible.
It's a great tip. As a fellow communicator, I can tell. I'm all for that. I think that's great. I apologize. I think a delivery truck just pulled up. Scott, did you have more to add there?
Yeah, I would say as well, and it's not necessarily across the board with all technology partners. But I like to have the assurance, like, for example, if I am meeting with one of our partners, I kind of, maybe I have an expectation in what I like to see evidence of. When they say something like, well, how's it going for you? And I'm thinking, well, you should know, right? You have metrics too, right? And you have, we're in this together. So you should have these numbers in front of you just like I do. And I want to hear your perspective too. So I certainly, when I flip the table, I want our partners to have at least some background that they've done some preparation for our meetings, and I think that's important and provides a little confidence for me. And then we can have a lot more meaningful conversation. The other thing that I think is important too is we certainly understand here at Kettering that our technology partners, some of them represent, a lot more universities, a lot of universities that, maybe they are small, maybe they are specialized, maybe they're even our competitors. And why not talk about what's working for them too? And, what they'll divulge kind of varies case by case, but you can kind of get a little bit of a marker of what's happening in the industry. Sometimes, I like to see case studies. Sometimes we go to conferences and things and we see, hey, this is what's happening in the industry. Well, it's so broad and it's so generalized that it almost means nothing to me. So I like to hear about these particular case studies here and there. And I get that information from our partners.
Yeah. That's great, Scott. I think that's great advice. And I will say this, hopefully, fingers crossed, wrapping up this like COVID world here soon, where we can all kind of go back to traveling and collaborating in person. If you think a higher ed conference is fun, you should try one of the tech partners conferences. And speaking from as an Ohio State administrator, I always found them so valuable. I'd go and find other people trying to with the same goals, right, or the same type of institution, and sit them down over at one of the meals and just say, okay, you're using this tool. I'm thinking about it. How do you use it? And what are the pitfalls and the good things and the great things? And that was always invaluable. And if you're at one of the technology conferences, everybody's there because they're using or looking at that tech. And that could be really helpful. Charisse, you have a thought?
I do. I also think it's a good idea to meet frequently with partners before they become partners. We've been working with ETS through the graduate school, and they're not officially partners yet, but they introduced a program and asked us if we wanted to be early adopters of that program for a certain amount of time with no cost to the institution. And so I think that's another good way to form these relationships, to say, yes, we'll be, I guess, the guinea pigs for the trial run of this program to see if it will work for us. And then we'll see where our relationship develops from there. Because I think that's a moment where you can begin to develop that trust, right? They trust you to try this program early on. You trust that they will allow you to do this to let you see if the program will work for you or not, and if you want to continue using it from there. And that's something that can happen before you make any kind of official commitments at all.
That's a great great addition. Thank you, Charisse, for that. We did get one more question in the Q&A that I'm gonna sneak in. Everybody gets about 1 minute to answer because we're coming up on close. Lisa sent in that their campus has different slate instances across various programs. There's no central grad school. So Charisse, you might be familiar with this, that they have 7 different instances as well as other admission systems. So just thinking about this as a decentralized kind of Wild West, right? Which I remember from back in the day. Can you recommend how best to collate, collect, combine the data from different admissions stages through enrollment if you're using different tools? And that's a big question that we could probably do a whole webinar on. But if anybody has any quick tips on just how to get started or a first step for our colleague Lisa with 1 minute for each answer. If anybody has any thoughts, you can just jump in.
I can give it a shot. I think we have somebody that works here in our enrollment management department that has a lot of experience in our operations team and some experience on admissions too. And she's recently actually even gotten involved in just being an observer of our graduate admissions committee. So she doesn't actually have a vote there, but she just watches what happens, and her head is trying to figure out how to put this information into different buckets because she has that familiarity with the CRM. So although we can't do it directly, we at least can ask the questions to make sure these buckets get filled appropriately.
I guess the question I would ask is there, and I understand that you don't have a central grad school. We have a central graduate school at Arkansas State University, but is there a way, can you form a committee that would sit down and look at what you're doing across these different instances and find a way to streamline those processes?
That's great. Thank you both. I think at least from a starting point, Trisha, did you have a last thought?
I was just wondering if there'd be a way to integrate that some of the just very skeletal data goes across all instances, maybe even the student's name, email, so that's a or a student ID number, so that each instant just holds a skeleton of each student, but not necessarily all students. So it'd be like, John Doe, is in the engineering program. This is his 700 number, and this is how far they've gotten in it, so that they'd have contact records on each instance. Seems a little excessive, but I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And it looks like in the Q&A, that's where they're going to start. And maybe your partners might be able to help you with how to get that skeleton stuff set up and which data points from each of your systems might be useful in that. Your partners might help you brainstorm and be good resources, even if they're working with systems that aren't theirs. They want you to be successful. So check with them too. So contact information is up. I also just want to jump before I toss over the next slide. We will be at CGS conference December 1st to the 4th and doing a session very similar to this. So if you found this helpful, if you want to hear more about sort of the ecosystem and how we're building this together, we certainly hope you'll come find us at CGS and attend our session. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to any of us, and I'm going to toss it back to Matthew to wrap us up for the day. And there you go. We'll be at the CGS annual meeting and look forward to seeing some of you in person, maybe. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much, Jillian. And thank you to all of our presenters, Charisse, Scott and Tricia. It was a really incredible conversation. I'm sure all the listeners got some great tips from it. So we do have just 2 upcoming events that I'd like to draw attention to. As Jillian mentioned, we do have the CGS 61st annual meeting. That's going to be December 1st through 4th at the Sheraton New Orleans Hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana. So we really hope to see as many of you there as possible. The other event that we have is another webinar, Mitigating the Caregiving Burden Among Graduate Students, Policies, Programs, and Practices. And that's going to be occurring next week, Wednesday, November 3rd, from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you to Liaison for your sponsorship. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you.